This is Tornado Talk, a weekly podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenons. Share your tornado story online by email or call us toll-free 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570. Now, meteorologist Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday, Tornado Talk is on.
In May, tornadoes are top of mind when you live in the nation's heartland. Kansas and Oklahoma get more twisters in the month of May than any other time of the year.
But each year is different. No season is ever the same. It all comes down to basic weather patterns and how they set up. Then it's watching, waiting, and warning.
This is not good. RFD starting to wrap around. These tornadoes may become rain right before they get into Dodge. They're not going to see them humming. Yeah, they're not going to see them coming at all.
From May 21st through the end of the month, tornadoes were reported somewhere in the plains every single day. The most significant storms occurred between May 21st and May 25th.
On May 24th and 25th, tornado emergencies were issued 2 days in a row for two Kansas communities, Chapman and Dodge City. They were close calls in Kansas.
Meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service in Dodge City, Larry Ruthie.
There was a sense of fear and concern that it would hit western Dodge City. Many of us have families that and relatives could be killed or injured by this thing.
Meteorologist and storm chaser Matt Crowther.
You could hear the roar. It sounded kind of like they say a freight train. I'd say more like a loud waterfall is more apt of how a tornado sounds when you're close to it.
Penn State meteorology student and storm chaser Harrison Sincavage.
My stomach dropped. Like, it was no longer about observing what was going on. I was just thinking. I could not stop thinking, oh my God, people are in the path of this thing, and it's going right towards Dodge. It was such a helpless feeling watching this violent, mile-wide tornado.
WIBW radio weather reporter Nick Gosnell.
All those thoughts going through your mind while at the same time trying to stay on the air and continue to bring the information that the people need right now. It was really kind of emotional for me in its own way.
And warning coordination meteorologist of the National Weather Service in Topeka, Chad Omit.
That tornado stayed on the ground for nearly 26 miles. And it was on the ground for about an hour and a half.
This is Close Calls in Kansas. Our look back at severe storms producing tornadoes that nearly hit two populated cities, one of which was wiped out by a tornado in 2008.
But these storm clouds had silver linings. While they caused damage and destruction, there was not one life lost.
Larry Ruthie at the National Weather Service said the severe weather setup really began coming together on Saturday, May 21st.
On the 21st, that was kind of the beginning of this lengthy episode of severe weather. We were beginning to get some decent Gulf moisture back, and we had a dry line, as we often get at this time of the year. The dry line will begin to push east during the day to mix east, and it'll probably get back during the nighttime hours. And as I recall, on the 21st, we did have a dry line that moved out into western Kansas with a good shear environment that developed. And we had a supercell that developed up in Wichita County and moved up into Logan County. And it just sat in that area for an extended period of time and put out tornadoes, a tremendous amount of rain and some sizable hail as well.
Harrison Sincavage is pursuing an education in meteorology at Penn State University. He works for the Storm Report Radio Network and iWeatherNet, tweeting the latest weather information on storms that occur around the world. This summer, Harrison is staying in Wichita, Kansas to study where all the ingredients come together. This season, he saw his first tornado. On May 21st, he was in western Kansas for a picturesque and photogenic event.
It was really odd being next to something that was basically sitting along the landscape that produced multiple tornadoes, and the winds are calm. I'm watching this storm as the sun's going down. It has a beautiful gray, pink-like tint to it as the sunlight's being refracted through the hail and the raindrops in it, and it just has this beautiful striation around it. And it was a textbook supercell. Really, you can really tell how the storm was rotating aloft, and it was just one of the more photogenic and picturesque storms of the season, I think. And around the meteorology community as well, people were stunned by how amazing the supercell was.
Matt Crowther agrees. He spent 33 years as a meteorologist at the Weather Channel. He and his wife Betsy, who is also a meteorologist, captured what nature had to offer that evening.
That was an amazing, amazing storm. It just sat there for 3 hours spinning. That's probably the most photogenic storm of the year, just storm-wise. And again, it was kind of a semi-marginal situation. They had a small little 5% tornado risk in that area. It was one of these deals where the upper flow wasn't very strong, and, the wind shear wasn't quite what you totally expect. But there was plenty of moisture cape in the atmosphere. It literally probably did not move more than 2 miles in 3 hours. So you could just set your tripod up and do time lapse, and I got some of my favorite supercell structure pictures I've got in a long time. There were a couple tornadoes with it, but we just kind of hung back, and then later on at night you could get the whole. It looked like one of those flying saucer, motherships, as Chase likes to call them. And it had all these different shapes and the sunset and lightning. It was they're incredible. That's my main focus when I go out storm chasing, is to get photographs. I'm more of a photographer than a videographer. I love the shape of an incredible mothership supercell. I would rather see that than probably 9 out of 10 tornadoes. I'm a storm chaser, not a tornado chaser.
According to the Storm Prediction Center, on May 22nd, there were 47 preliminary reports of tornadoes that occurred across 4 states: South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Texas. Some of the tornadoes were large, yet luckily, no one was hurt.
Storm chase teams called into work to get off the day on Monday because the weather pattern showed no signs of slowing down. There were far fewer tornado reports, but it was one that occurred near Woodward, Oklahoma, that went wild on social media. Harrison Sienkiewicz says he and his friends were spotting from on top of a hill. Much like the Leota, Kansas storm, a third tornado they saw in northwest Oklahoma would provide a beautiful backdrop.
And as this tornado's just moving through the landscape, not damaging any buildings, not hurting anybody, the sun began to set below the base of the storm. And as it was setting, the sun had an orange to reddish glow to it, and it illuminated the tornado beautifully. It was a spectacular sunset to watch something in nature occur, one of the most violent forces on Earth being a tornado, and watching the sunset behind it. It was a very, almost like serene kind of view, given it was an open field, and it was just a paradox, really, to just be awed by something that's so strong, and just to see this incredible sunset was one of the most amazing things I think a lot of people have witnessed. That it's not very often that you get a tornado and the sunset, where the sun's right next to the tornado, and you can actually see through the base of the storm.
Tuesday, May 24th, became more threatening. By afternoon, an outflow boundary would be the focus for more severe weather in western Kansas. Larry Ruthie at the National Weather Service said it was a unique setup.
And it was that boundary that really enhanced the low-level flow. We had strong east to southeast flow that developed behind that boundary during the afternoon hours, and the draw line propagated east during the daytime hours into far southwestern Kansas. So it's kind of a triple point with a subsynoptic area of low pressure that developed over southwest Kansas, with a really intense area of low-level shear that evolved from south central Kansas on up toward Scott County. And then the thunderstorms developed during the late afternoon hours, starting around 4 o'clock up in Scott County. We had our first tornado report just a little before 4 o'clock up in Scott County. That one area of thunderstorms moved across Scott and Lane into Ness County. And our first, we had 2 or 3 tornadoes reported, relatively weak ones across Scott and Lane County. But the first significant tornado of the day was the one that developed in the southwestern part of Ness County as an EF3 tornado. That was around 6:15, 6:25, that time frame, and that moved off toward the northeast. And at the same time that was going on, we had other thunderstorms that started to develop with the next cluster down in Ford County.
Harrison Sienkiewicz and his storm chase partner Danny Welch started May 24th near Buffalo, Oklahoma, working their way toward Mineola, Kansas.
We got in our truck and continued to travel north on Highway 283, and we saw our first funnel cloud. And it lingered for about 30 to 60 seconds before finally touching down. And as that happened, there was a secondary funnel immediately to its right that began to form. So we had a rope tornado to the left, and kind of it was like a needle funnel, if you will, to the right. and we had twin tornadoes almost right away.
Harrison said those twin tornadoes were the first of 4 sets. As the tornadoes approached Dodge City from the south, officials grew worried at the National Weather Service in Dodge City. Forecasters agreed that the city was in danger. A catastrophic situation was unfolding. Larry Ruthie said forecasters made the call to issue a statement that would get the attention of residents.
Tornado emergency for Dodge City. The National Weather Service in Dodge City has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Ford County in southwestern Kansas. A confirmed large and destructive tornado was observed 4 miles southwest of Dodge City, moving north at 20 miles per hour. This is a tornado emergency for Dodge City.
It was at that moment that the reality went from professional to personal for Larry Ruthie and his staff.
Being able to look out the window west of the office and see this unbelievably intense wall cloud with tornadoes, it's kind of it's a frightening and an humbling experience. And we were actually had some discussion whether we needed to take emergency precautions and proceed to our safe room, and decided everything was going to pass west of Dodge City. That's kind of what we get paid to do. But there was a sense of fear and concern that it would hit western Dodge City. Many of us have families that and relatives and friends that live on the west side of town, and there's that concern of people we really know and are acquainted with, and family members could be killed or injured by this thing. And so there's a heightened level of concern when something like that happens.
Harrison Sincavage and Danny Welch put down their cameras. The approach had changed. Now a populated area was being threatened. The beauty of nature could easily become devastation.
The drill bit tornado started to rope out, and we had this very large multi-vortex tornado that's just churning across the landscape. It's coming up on the vicinity of southwest Dodge City.
A large stovepipe tornado. It almost looks like a barrel. And we have a developing large tornado to its right.
And traveling on Highway 400, I couldn't record video. I couldn't take photos anymore because I was so drawn in to what was happening. And it was the first time that I actually got scared, thinking, what is about to happen to Dodge City? Watching that drill bit tornado with the horizontal vortices, this multi-vortex tornado that was about a mile wide, go towards southwest Dodge City, my stomach dropped. Like, it was no longer about observing what was going on. I was just thinking, I could not stop thinking, oh my God, people are in the path of this thing, and it's going right towards Dodge City. It was such a helpless feeling watching this violent, mile-wide tornado go toward town.
Dodge City was spared from a direct hit, but there was damage. Harrison Sincavage and Danny Welch found themselves in a position to help.
And all of a sudden I see this house. The roof is gone. The brick frame walls collapsed. One was blown in. And I just shouted to my friend that just stop the truck right now. And we got out of the truck and we see this woman just waving her arms frantically. And we had no way initially to get to them. They were down power lines. The power lines were live, and there was no physical way that we could get around them. So we ran about 50 to 100 yards east along Highway 50, and we finally found an opening that we could get in. The power lines were maybe 6 feet or so above the ground. They were about my height, so it was roughly 6 feet. So we army crawled underneath the power lines, and we just darted to the house to help these people. We come up to the house to 2 elderly women. One she was standing, but she had a cut on her head, and there was another woman who was trapped underneath the collapsed wall. And we didn't know if she couldn't move. We didn't know if her back, her spine was injured or whatnot. So we stayed with the 2 elderly women. They were 86 and 95 years old, and the elderly woman trapped underneath the wall was 95 years old. The hail core of the storm wrapped back around, and my friend and I got hit with golf ball sized hailstones protecting the elder woman. There was no roof, so there was nowhere we could go to shelter them. So we grabbed blankets. We grabbed what we could. Basically, I grabbed a it was like a tablecloth. I just put it over this elderly woman, and I just grabbed a cushion, put it over her head, and I just shielded her with my body as my friend and I got hit with golf ball-sized hailstones. And after the hail core passed, we were finally able to get through to 911 after multiple attempts. And eventually the paramedics and firefighters were able to find an opening in the power lines after figuring out a way to get their emergency vehicles through. And they were able to get the two elderly women to the hospital, and miraculously they were released the following day in fair condition. It was truly miraculous that they survived. I was able to ask the one woman who was standing. She was in shock, but she knew what happened. She knew where she was. I asked, "Did you see it coming?" And she said that they saw what was the drill bit tornado move off to the west, but they didn't realize that the low-hanging cloud there was the multi-vortex tornado. It was not condensed all the way to the ground, and there were these little vortices curving through the landscape, and that's what hit their house. There was a subvortex that curved right through their property and hit their house, because the houses immediately to their west and east, their neighbors, suffered some broken windows and some shingle damage. But here's a brick frame house that suffered major damage.
The National Weather Service estimates 12 to 15 tornadoes in western Kansas. EF3 damage occurred east of Ensign, Kansas. A semi was overturned on US 50. A number of homes were damaged west of Dodge City. A large propane tank began leaking, and a landfill building north of Dodge City was struck. In all, there were 5 EF3s, 2 EF2s, and 2 EF1s.
Larry Ruthie at the National Weather Service said it was a tornado oddity that occurred at a farmhouse that day that caught his attention.
That one hit a farm that was hit back in 2007 on May 28th with another EF3 tornado and destroyed. So that individual was hit by 2 significant tornadoes in less than a decade.
On May 25th, most of the afternoon was quiet across the plains. It was one storm that formed in north central Kansas that would become what everyone was watching. Meteorologist and storm chaser Matt Crowther was with his wife Betsy as they watched it all begin.
And we got up on it, and actually there was a small tornado that was down for about a minute west of Bennington, little kind of an elephant trunk tornado. And then we followed it east. In fact, we were one of the few chasers that followed it due east from there. A lot of chasers were south of it to begin with. We went on the road east from Bennington, and we saw the supercell get better and better organized, and we stopped on the highway, which goes south to Solomon, Kansas. We stopped about 5 miles south, and there were about 3 or 4 other chasers sitting there with us, and the tornado formed due west of us. And looking at it, you could tell that it was coming straight for us, but it was moving pretty slowly, probably about 20 miles an hour or so. And so we just basically let it approach us, and it got bigger and bigger, and it got bigger because it was getting closer, of course, but then it got bigger because it was actually growing in size. And when it got about a mile away, we just went down the road about half a mile to let it pass just to our north, and you could hear the roar. It sounded kind of like they say a freight train. I'd say more like a loud waterfall is more apt of how a tornado sounds when you're close to it. And it was about a half to 3/4 of a mile wide as it passed just north of us on the road. And then we followed it east for about, 20 or 30 miles, but it was still huge, and you could tell it was a violent tornado by the motion. It kind of looked like videos of, have you ever seen the Tuscaloosa tornado or Andover, Kansas, some famous EF4, EF5 tornadoes? The motion is very violent. You can just kind of visually see the very, very strong upward and rotational motion in the storm.
Chad Omid of the National Weather Service in Topeka said his team was keeping an eye on the tornado as it moved in from the west.
And that supercell moved east-southeast across parts of north central and northeast Kansas during the evening of May 25th. That was a unique setup, really. When we look at the types of tornadoes we see, violent tornadoes not common. Here in Kansas, we get them every few years. But what was unique about this system or this situation was the fact that tornado stayed on the ground for nearly 26 miles. And it was on the ground for about an hour and a half. And we have visual confirmations of that and also radar data that substantiate the fact that this thing was on the ground for upwards of an hour and a half, about 26 mile long path.
As the storm churned north of I-70, it damaged farms, homes north of Abilene, and eventually headed toward a community that had been hit by a tornado before.
In Chapman, Kansas, residents knew to take the tornado warning seriously. The community was virtually destroyed by a twister in June of 2008. When the storm got within miles of Chapman, the National Weather Service issued a tornado emergency. Our radio partners at KSAL in Salina and WIBW in Topeka were on the air with coverage. Nick Gosnell and our own Jennifer Naramore pleaded with the public to take shelter.
They just put a tornado emergency out for Chapman.
Okay. Tornado emergency for the city of Chapman as a confirmed large and destructive tornado located just west of the city, moving east at 15 miles an hour. Again, we'll repeat ourselves. Please take your tornado precautions immediately. In fact, don't wait for me to finish the sentence. Go to wherever it is you're going for a tornado warning, because you're in a life-threatening situation in the city of Chapman. Flying debris may be deadly to those caught without shelter. Mobile homes will be destroyed as well.
We're seeing some of the radar imagery that's coming through the dual pole radar that can actually show you whether or not debris is being lofted, and we are seeing the debris ball, that signature on radar near Chapman. So folks, this tornado is on the ground, it's causing damage, and it's heading right toward the Chapman area. This is no joke. A tornado emergency for you as the storm continues to steadily move off to the east at about 20 miles per hour, right over the Chapman area. Dangerous situation here. Please, folks, do not try to go out and see what's going on. Stay in your shelter until we tell you that it's safe to move out of it. Do not try to outrun this. Do not try to drive around it, anything like that. Just stay in your shelter until this passes through. And it's actually slowed down a little bit. It's now moving east at 15 miles per hour. It's held this pace here around 15 to 20 miles per hour over the past, hour and a half now. And it's been on the ground for a while. So, folks, tornado emergency, Chapman. Be in your shelter and do not move until this pushes through.
The tornado passed just south of Chapman. For the second day in a row, another close call in Kansas.
No fatalities and no major injuries. Chad Omit at the National Weather Service in Topeka says the tornado caused EF4 damage from Niles to near Chapman, Kansas.
This storm itself, it looked as though it was going to weaken and end, and perhaps the storm interaction allowed this tornado to actually persist and intensify again as it moved across Interstate 70 and just to the south of this small town of Chapman. That's where the most intense damage was seen, and that's where the EF4, the violent tornado rating, was designated to a farmstead just southwest, maybe a mile or so southwest of the small town of Chapman, Kansas.
It was a sigh of relief. WIBW Radio's Nick Gosnell has traveled the interstate where the large tornado occurred that evening and felt as if he could visually see those who were in harm's way.
I passed the Chapman exit on Interstate 70 many times, and you can still see tree damage from the 2008 storm if you look in the trees above a Cenex gas station there at the Chapman exit off of I-70, and that's immediately what I thought of as we went through the tornado emergency situation there in the Chapman area on May 25th. What also struck me was the verbiage used by the National Weather Service. Obviously, they've changed in the last few years to using much more strong language in their tornado warnings and tornado emergency warnings to really talk about what storms can do and to actually read those words for the first time for me in a storm of that magnitude really brought things home. Also, as part of my work in McPherson prior to coming to WIBW, I did a few high school football games in Chapman, and I remember some of the new construction of the high school and things of that nature that took place after the 2008 storm that I thought to myself, are they going to have to build again? All those thoughts going through your mind while at the same time trying to stay on the air and continue to bring the information that the people need right now. It was really kind of emotional for me in its own way.
We're thankful that nobody was seriously hurt. We had to our knowledge, no hospitalizations and no fatalities. There were 20 to 25 structures that were severely damaged or destroyed by this long-track tornado, and really a situation we're thankful for that again, nobody was seriously hurt or killed.
The atmosphere may have played a part in disrupting what could have been on Thursday, May 26th. There were tornado reports in northeastern Kansas, but the atmosphere early on appeared much more violent. Harrison Sienkiewicz was worried the night before.
Thursday ended up not happening in the afternoon, which is a very good thing.
Larry Ruthie agrees.
That morning when I went through the data, I was concerned we were going to have another major outbreak with potential loss of life. But what hurt us that day, we had a number of thunderstorms in Oklahoma that kicked the outflow boundary up into southwestern Kansas. So by the time we were able to initiate the thunderstorm activity in the afternoon, we had stabilized the low levels of the atmosphere somewhat, and so we didn't have any reported tornadoes on that particular day when the environment favored, at least in the morning, it looked like we would have another significant outbreak. So all of these mesoscale features have to come together just right, like they did on the 24th, in order to get a major outbreak, and that's why they're so rare.
But why the weather does or does not produce tornadoes continues to fascinate forecasters. As one longtime meteorologist, the late Cecil Carrier, once said, just when you think you've outsmarted a Mother Nature, she'll prove you wrong.
And when you witness close calls and see the power of nature affect those in person, it can shake you to the core.
It's one thing when you see it on the television, but when you come up on a house, you see people hurt, bleeding, they're trapped. You're the only two on scene. There's nobody else around. There's no paramedics. There's no policemen. There's no firefighters. Nobody's there. Instinct and adrenaline just took over, and we did what we could to protect them. And that changed my perspective on why it is I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm studying meteorology.
And I appreciate his dedication to helping people in helping that older couple that had been injured. I was impressed with that, so we appreciate that.
Next on Tornado Talk, he studied tornadoes with the legendary Dr. Ted Fujita, who founded the Fujita Damage Scale. He called it the experience of a lifetime.
Later, that PhD came to my benefit, putting me in the expert position for the severe weather expert at the Weather Channel.
Episode 9 is all Dr. Greg Forbes on Tornado Talk.
This has been Tornado Talk, powered by thestormreport.com.